Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Salmons, Methods Guru for Sage Method Space. And today we're having a research conversation about action research. And this will kick off a month-long focus on these approaches on method space. I'm delighted to be joined by Ernie Stringer and Alfredo Ortiz Aragon. And we'll have an interesting chat about their work and ideas for the field. But before we get started with that, if you are new to Method Space, this is a blog community sponsored by Sage Publications. We're interested in all things to do with research design, planning, conducting, analyzing the findings, and then writing them up and sharing results in all kinds of ways. Put this into the context of impact. How can research make a difference? And at the heart of it all is teaching and learning, because we feel that, you know, at whatever stage we may be, there are new things we can learn about research. And so whether you are a student or an experienced researcher, we hope that you'll find something that will be new and interesting for you. So Alfredo and Ernie, why don't you begin by introducing yourselves?
Oh, sorry, Janet. I'm Ernie Stringer. I, for a long time, have been an action research practitioner. I've worked all over Australia, where I'm based, but also spent significant times in North America and in other parts of the world, engaging in action research projects and teaching action research. So that's basically me. I'm currently sitting in Perth, or Fremantle, Western Australia, which is part of the largest city of Perth.
And Alfredo?
Hi, yeah, thanks, Janet. So Alfredo Ortiz Aragon, I'm from northern New Mexico, but I live in South Texas in San Antonio. And I always have to distinguish that I'm not from here, even though I do like San Antonio, but I'm a New Mexican. And I started as a practitioner working many years in international development. And I discovered action research a little bit in that work. And then I went and studied, got a PhD really focused on action research, well, now quite a few years ago. And I teach at the University of the Incarnate Word in San Antonio, Texas, where I'm always trying to find ways to use action research to kind of connect the community to the classroom and get the classroom out into the community.
Right. So before we start talking about the book, I'm wondering whether you could help, especially people who might be new to action research, by defining, you know, what you mean by this term.
So for me, action research is a systematic approach to inquiry, research onto significant problems that people experience in their professional or community or family lives. It's a participatory approach to research that looks for not just a report on what goes on, but for real life solutions to the problems and the issues that are the focus of the research. That is, in a nutshell, for me, is what action research is.
Yeah, the only thing I could add on in a brief version is if for people who work mostly in academic spaces, universities, research institutes, action research is really a call to take action as a way of learning and to involve more people in the process, and assume that there's a lot of expertise all around us, and not only in the formal research processes that we're normally used to carrying out. And in other worlds, like practitioner spaces, where I come from originally, whether that's teachers, people who work in different areas of healthcare, to them, I think it's a little bit of a call to become a little bit more reflective and harvest learning a little bit more than they're used to, and usually than they have time for, Just find a little better way to become a little bit more of a harvester of knowledge, leverage that to inform the way they're working, and to in some moments to challenge some of the hierarchies that exist in our workplaces that aren't being very productive, that are not being very helpful to actually achieving the outcomes that we're trying to achieve.
Well, it certainly seems timely because we have, all the problems that we had before now with, many additional new, and problems we don't even yet know the full ramifications of due to the pandemic. So, I think, we certainly have, much more of a concern about, research that actually results in change or new practices or new policies or new ways of thinking that, are closely aligned to the places where the problems occur. So I'm really glad that, we're able to talk with you and learn more from your experience this month. So the new edition of the Action Research text is out. So perhaps you could begin by, talking a little bit about this new edition and, what's new in this 5th edition of the Action Research text.
So I'll start off by saying what's not new.
Okay.
Because the first 4 editions were well received, and some of the basis for that is that it provides people not with overall large projects that they need to do separately from their ongoing work in their professional or community contexts, but provides the means by which they can, with very few resources really, do investigations that really go to the heart. And so what the 5th edition does is to maintain what the feedback I've had is that it gives very clear instructions with a minimum of the academic, sometimes arcane academic language that normal people wouldn't understand. So it's very approachable, very, I don't want to say simple, but it's an easy way of starting to learn about the detail of steps that need to be taken or can be taken in order to achieve the outcomes that you desire, to find solutions to people's problems. So that's included, still part of the 5th edition. Alfredo, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I'll add a couple things that aren't different, and then we can talk a little bit about some of the new bells and whistles that we've added to it. So another thing that's really maybe slightly strengthened, but was there in the previous versions, is building around doing what Ernie mentioned in terms of giving people an actual process, procedures, steps that they can use to carry out action research, but building it around a really simple framework that, a lot of action research texts have a common learning framework of, kind of observe, act, plan, the Kolb learning framework. There's quite a few different ones. And this one's just simpler. It's look, think, act. And look, is all the things that we can do to find out about what's going on, generate knowledge with people, and just better understand what a situation is. Think is all the processes that we can use to understand what it is that we're learning, to really harvest, organize information, and get it in front of people so that we can use it to guide our next steps. And then act is a little more overt moment of really taking action in ways that we can see are contributing to some kind of improvement. And so that simple but really powerful framework is still there, and we've just built a few more tools around it, and but that engine is still core to the book. Another thing that's still there is a lot of personal testimonials, some great examples from Ernie's work. We've added in a few examples from my work and experience, And so we're aware that concepts only become real when people can connect them to their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so we try to connect our lives in different ways, our experiences in there, so that people can have some place to hang some of these concepts. Yeah, go ahead, Ernie.
So what's new in this is that as we planned the book, we looked at the current context and said, how is this context new and different from the past context? One of the things that stood out for us is that there's been a dramatic change in the use of information technology and social media in societies by and large around the world since the last edition. So we have a whole chapter which is put together by a team of people, both experts and practitioners, which looks at the ways in which social media can be used to enhance and extend the action research processes that are embedded in the book, in the text. So that's new, and as an older person, I really have enjoyed the way that Alfredo's team has provided us with not only understanding of the different applications of information technology and social media, but given really lovely examples of the way it actually has been used so far, as well as the potential for where it could be used. So that one level is the new part of the 5th edition. The other thing that is in there is something which is probably more directed at experienced practitioners, people who have been doing action research, and it arises out of an understanding by me that sometimes people do an action research process for a particular problem and then say, well, that was nice, and get on with their business, and they've done their action research. Now, for me, action research is a continuing part of my professional and academic life. And any one project that I'm engaged in, and it might be just a small teaching project. How do I go about teaching this class? Or how do I solve the problem with this PhD student? I engage that as a problem-solving process with them. And I've realized that I'm using developmental processes that I've learned over the years. So there's in the latter stages of the book, there's a whole section on developmental action research. How can we actually make change? How can we leverage from those small, quite simple processes to get larger outcomes that actually spread out through the community? And if I can give an example out of my own experience with this, I started working some 15 years ago now in a small Aboriginal community in Western Australia, in the desert regions of West Australia. It was very isolated, and you'd say, well, there's nowhere to go with this. So working with a group of women, I was able to, from their ideas, in fact, about how can we improve the school experience of the kids, because the school was, I've just got to say, a little bit of a disaster area. And they decided to start a school breakfast. Now that had such a wonderful influence on the school itself that people in the community started to say, oh, you're doing cooking for the kids. Could you cook for our next meeting? Or we have an event coming up. So the short story is that they started a catering service, which provided services not just in their little community, but for other communities in the region. As well as catering service, they started doing home and community care activities, looking after the older people in their communities. In the end, that their activities got a lot of notice outside of the desert communities. And so government people at the state and federal level started to say, wow, what are these women doing? Why is that? How did this happen? So from a little school breakfast, we had something that was able to really influence the people who are responsible for centralized services and programs. So this is what I mean by developmental approaches, and there's technologies associated with that. So that's another one of the new things that are in there.
So
Alfredo.
in terms of the use of the book, it sounds like, it's written in a practical way. So might this be something that would be professional reading, or reading by, a community partner who might be engaged with a research team?
Alfredo, could you take this one?
Sure. Yeah, well, I think there's different audiences for sure, and even the way we use literature this time around, we changed it a little bit in a way that both allows people to dig deep into some of the concepts, but also makes it very accessible. So instead of just weaving through a bunch of references through the normal text, we created a bunch of specific examples called literature corners that we put throughout the book, and that accomplished this. Again, they accomplished people being able to both understand bigger concepts, so that's more for an advanced user maybe, but at the same time, because they're everyday examples, including people using photo voice or digital storytelling, or different examples with different groups, they're able to relate to them and understand them fairly easily. So to answer your specific question, we think for sure graduate programs, undergraduate programs as well, any course that has the word research in it could benefit from this book. The reason why the book is so versatile, we think, is because it's not just meant for someone to learn how to go do research outside of the school or outside of their normal learning. It can also be used to help teachers turn their own classrooms into action research sites, whereby they use action research as a process to improve the way they engage with their own students, and that their students engage with people outside of the university to kind of really expand the learning. In terms of community groups, we're right now here in San Antonio working with a group of parents and caretakers of kids with autism, and with the City of San Antonio's Healthy Neighborhoods program, where we will be using a lot of the techniques and tools and explanations that are in the book with community groups, city actors, etc. So it's definitely, there's something in there for everyone, but we've tried to make it both deep but also accessible to a wide range of audiences. I don't know if you'd frame it any differently, Ernie.
Well, I'd just add to that, one of the things that I notice about the work that I do with people in my projects or in my everyday professional and academic life is the joy that comes out of engaging in this participatory process, where people understand clearly what's happening and where they're able to achieve really significant outcomes for their research, to engage in wonderful interactions with different groups that they otherwise may not have been able to do. And it's not just something that's a process that they're dragging their way through for a course requirement or something they need to do because they're in strife in their organization or agencies. But as they start to work, they say, oh, this is really good. We're learning something here that's really important. And so they get energized. And we hope that energizing, that vitality that people experience as they engage in real life research that affects their lives in a very positive way, that it comes through not just in understanding the processes of action research, but the joy and the life that emerges in the stories that we tell about places where we have had very successful outcomes for not just ourselves, but particularly for the people who are at the center of the research processes, those whose lives are being affected.
I think, we talk a lot about the, the need to balance or create bridges between theory and practice. And what you've described, certainly, points to that. So, given our current situation with the COVID-19 pandemic, in particular, I'm interested in suggestions you might have for researchers who are, in a position where they must reframe the research. In some situations, they need to change the approach they're going to use because they no longer have access to the sites or whatever. And in other situations where they realize that the problems they were planning to study are not really relevant anymore. So what suggestions do you have for people who might be in that kind of a situation?
So I can come back to what I said about the chapter on social media. And I've noticed this already in my work. Alfredo and I are separated by the circumference of the planet from each other. The teams of people that we work with are in different places, and yet in this era especially, we're able to interact and communicate very effectively in the ways that we're doing now. And there are a whole range of applications which can enable people to continue to enact their processes of inquiry and research through the use of the technology. So this has been a very important part for me to learn personally how it is that this technology really opens up the possibilities for continuing to do the work that we love so well. Alfredo, you might have something to add to that.
Yeah, we're all having to think about it a lot, and most of us realized early on that this wasn't just quick. Let's adapt, but let's wait it out until things come back to normal. We know things are not going to be any kind of normal the way we used to think of it for a long time, and so I can give two quick examples. One, we did had a deep dive into community-based participatory research this summer, whereby we used a combination of Padlet, Edmodo, Mural, and we found ways to really dig deep into the kind of constructing knowledge together, creating really interesting solutions, ideas, and in some cases, individual students are still going out and doing work in the field. We have a student, for example, who works for a community kind of rights organizing group called Cops Metro here in San Antonio. And she was using some of the things we were talking about in class directly in her work there. We have another student who's a doctor, but she's in the medical school, and she was getting her master's in adult ed. She took the class, and she started applying some of the community-based participatory methods directly with her students that were just coming in this new year. And the important thing is, action research really starts from the idea that there's humans on the other side, and that we need to get to know each other. And it's not just an instrumental, how do we quickly get to know each other so we can get on to extracting knowledge. We're willing to go slow and emerge and get to know people. And so you can still do that in technological spaces, and we've been doing that. I'll just give you one more quick example, which is a colleague of ours, good friend and colleague, Mary Brighton Miller. Her and some of her colleagues, friends are using technology in a really powerful way in England they're using this thing called critical utopian action research, which is, but it's basically a process by which they're using an online learning platform that's free, Edmodo, combined again with Padlet, which is a nice, simple bulletin board sort of, not bulletin board, a simple whiteboard that's pretty structured and easy to use. And they're running a major strategic planning process with community organizations in England. And it's allowing more participation than they had been able to achieve before, because people can come in and out whenever they need. You can design in more asynchronous moments to it, where it's not where people all have to show up at a workshop for 2 days together, or or be always showing up once a month or whatever. They're given more opportunities. So of course we're dying to go back into the communities and into the field, but we've mostly seen the opportunities that are going to continue to serve us because of COVID and our embracing of technologies that in some ways increase participation.
Right. Well, it was certainly forward thinking of you to include that addition to this text, of course, not knowing when you were writing the book, how essential that would be and how useful that would be. So I think that's an excellent contribution. So I know that you have put together a special issue for the International Review of Qualitative Research, and that will be available to methods-based readers, open access this month. So maybe you could talk a little bit about your work with the contributors to that special issue.
Yeah, well, so Mary Bryden-Miller, Michael Kroll, and me, the three of us came together, and I was brought in a little bit later, but we shepherded a special issue on participatory action research, really targeted to the big world of qualitative researchers that show up every year to the International Congress of Qualitative Inquiry. So that the journal that you mentioned is the journal that comes out published kind of alongside with that Congress. And matter of fact, that Congress is where Ernie and I met, and we're collaborating with Mary. And so I'll say two things. I'll talk about the special issue in 1 second, but I want to just say that we were planning in May of this last year, before COVID hit, Ernie, me, Mary, a few other colleagues, to really, at ICQI, make a splash, but not in the sense of like trying to sell action research, just in the sense of trying to say, there's so much power to what you're doing. If we could just find a way to take it a little bit further and include more of an intentional action focus, there'd be no stopping us. And so we've been making a lot of effort to try to really educate the field. And we're not just interested in people taking up a few methods here and there, learning more what is action research. We really, like most action researchers, want to encourage a broader awareness raising around the power and potential of action research in its different forms. And so one version of that, one tool for that is this special issue. And there's some really cool articles in there that range from, using systematization, a lot of river of life. There's an article on self in field, which is a colleague of ours, Victor Friedman, where he really shows how you can use Lewinian field theory to better understand why things aren't working, to get us to be able to step outside of the situation that we're in and see what it is that we're doing wrong and that others are doing wrong and right that's prohibiting us from making change. There's an article on critical utopian action research that I mentioned earlier in there. There's a really cool article on how to process data for use. So you'll see in our book that we really explain that we don't just generate a bunch of data to let it pile up and then to write a big research report at the end. That may be part of it, but we care about turning it into forms that people can use now. And there's an article in the special issue on how to use poetry as a way of coding data and presenting it back to communities for them to continue working with it. So there's like 8, I think, different articles. They're all really unique, and we think we're trying to contribute to the conversations, particularly in this case with qualitative researchers. So yeah, I'm excited that you'll be able to share that as well.
So if I could just add a comment to that, it brings to mind for me 2 things. One is that what these action research processes do is put us in contact with a lot of people in a lot of different contexts. I started off as a teacher. Education is my professional background, but in recent decades, I've been working across a whole range of areas, town planning, community health, social work, I mentioned town planning. So it really is something that enables you to work in a whole range of different ways with a whole range of different people just through following these simple processes.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to
It
focus
gives a
on
way for interdisciplinary approaches,
absolutely.
which is something that, you know, we method space itself is multidisciplinary, and we really want people to have the opportunity to learn from one another. I think, you know, it's really essential right now, especially when we have so many critical problems we need to study, and they're not problems that just live in one place. We need to look at it from different angles. So, you know, having a methodology that kind of creates a kind of, like you say, you know, a systematic approach that, you know, invites in those different voices seems particularly valuable at this time.
Yeah, yeah. So the other comment I wanted to make is that because the action research that we're approach to action research we're promoting is based on a very simple set of procedures. The Look Think Act really enables people to chart where they're at in the process and the continuing cycles of action research. But it's based on something very simple, and I never get tired of telling the story of how very early in my life as a school teacher, I was stationed, posted to a very small, remote Aboriginal community. Myself and my wife, newly married, were the two teachers that were the school. In the first day or so, we discovered that what we were doing in the classroom was just so ineffective. It was just not working at all. The kids were sitting there silently. They were rarely able to say anything that made much sense to us. And I thought, what's going on here? What can I do? So having one lunchtime, got through all of my lessons for the day by lunchtime, I decided to take the kids for a walk out into the bush, which surrounded the community. They took me for a walk out into the bush. They came to life. They chatted and talked and clung to my clothes and my hands and walked me through the bush, showed me all the joys of the foods they could eat, the berries and roots that were around, pointed out the birds, the lizards, some of the animals. They just loved telling me about their lives in the bush. It was so engaging. They were so energized that when I went back to the classroom, I was able to use all of that material. Tell me more about this. Tell me more about that. They became my teachers of their lives, and that experience has stayed with me. There is an enormous amount of knowledge and energy in people's lives, and if we can tap into that, that becomes the energizer of the research that we do. So although we can get involved in some quite spectacularly complex procedures, at the heart of it is that very simple act of opening up the potential of the people that are in the context that we are assisting them to do research on their problems.
Right.
So I never...
Well, I'm pleased that you will be contributing on Method Space throughout the month. And so I hope that those who are watching this discussion will take a look at the special issue articles and keep your eyes open for the series of posts we'll be sharing throughout the month. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I'll just add just one thing, because like, as you say, we'll be sharing a lot. Just tied to what Ernie just said, we think that this Look Think Act is something that humans do all the time.
Mhm.
And so in some ways we're trying to get some people to maybe think more, maybe other people to act more, maybe other people to look more. But we think that at its heart, action research is built on a very cyclical way of living model. And that when people can see that they're already capable of it, sure, you can learn some new tools that help you get stronger in certain areas, but we're really just want to make it clear to people that it's actually not that new. It's something that you already know how to do. We just need to be a little more conscious of it and then strengthen certain elements of it if we're going to be able to kind of use it more to our advantage and leverage its power as best as we can.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to our continued work on the series this month on method space.
And thank you, Janet, for providing us with this opportunity to share our ideas about action research in particular, and the 5th edition, which we hope will be something that people will find very useful and valuable for their own works.
Yes, yes.